My name is Andrea Wallace. I'm 32 years old, and last Easter, my family tried to erase me from my own history. I was sitting at the dinner table, the same table where my mother used to serve her famous sweet potato casserole, when my brother looked me dead in the eye and told me I was never really part of this family. He said, "Ask your mother why." My mother has been dead for 25 years. My dad dropped his fork. The whole room went silent. 18 people, forks frozen midair, napkins clutched in fists. And then my grandmother, the quietest woman at the table, 78 years old, bad knees, purse on her lap like always, stood up. She reached into that worn leather bag she's carried every single day for as long as I can remember, pulled out a yellowed envelope and said, "I've waited 25 years to show you this. Before I tell you what was inside that envelope, do me a favor, hit like and subscribe, but only if this story earns it, and drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from." Now let me take you back to March of last year, the week before Easter, when I got the phone call that started everything. I was sitting in my apartment in Richmond, reviewing structural plans for a bridge retrofit, when my phone buzzed. Dad's name on the screen. He doesn't call often, maybe twice a year. My birthday if Lorraine reminds him, and whenever there's a family announcement, he can't delegate to a group text. "Andrea, your stepmother and I want the whole family together for Easter this year." His voice had that particular flatness it gets when he's reading from a script someone else wrote. "Lorraine says we need to talk about the future of the house." The house. My mother's house. The one where Catherine Wallace planted tulips every March, read me stories in the upstairs den, and marked my height on the kitchen door frame with a pencil and a tiny star. I hadn't been back since Thanksgiving, when Lorraine seated me at the far end of the table, next to the kitchen door, like hired help who'd wandered in from the wrong entrance. "Your grandmother Eleanor will be there too," Dad added. "She asked about you." That's what made me say yes. Not him, not the house. My grandmother. "One more thing," he said, and his tone shifted. Confused, almost apologetic. "Lorraine says to bring some form of identification, a driver's license or something. She says it's for some kind of paperwork." I set my pen down. "Paperwork? At Easter dinner?" "I don't know, sweetheart. She just said to bring it." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the blueprints on my desk. I build things for a living. Bridges, overpasses, structures designed to bear enormous weight. I know what stress fractures look like before a collapse. And that phone call had fractures all through it. I should tell you about the house. It sits on a half-acre lot at the end of Birch Lane in Millfield, Virginia. A 2-story colonial revival with a wide front porch and blue shutters my grandfather Robert painted the summer before I was born. The kind of house where the screen door slaps shut behind you and the neighbors wave without slowing their cars. My mother, Catherine, loved that house the way some people love churches. She planted yellow tulips along the front walk every spring. She kept a reading nook in the upstairs den with a green velvet chair that smelled like her perfume, something with jasmine. And every few months she'd stand me against the kitchen door frame, press a pencil flat on top of my head, and draw a small line. Then she'd add a star beside it. "That's how much you've grown," she'd tell me. "One star at a time." She died when I was 7. Lung cancer, caught too late. She never smoked a day in her life. After she was gone, Dad fell apart. Couldn't cook, couldn't get me to school on time, couldn't look at the tulips without sitting on the porch steps and pressing his palms into his eyes. Lorraine Pruitt showed up about a year and a half later. A friend of a friend from Dad's office. She brought casseroles. She organized the pantry. She told Dad he didn't have to do everything alone. Within 6 months, she'd moved in. Within a year, she and Dad were married. She brought Tyler, her 4-year-old son. And slowly, quietly, like someone rearranging furniture while you sleep, every trace of my mother began to disappear. The wedding photos came off the mantel. The jasmine perfume vanished from the den. The tulips got ripped out and replaced with white gravel. But the pencil marks on the kitchen doorframe, those stayed, because Lorraine never noticed them. I drove 2 hours from Richmond on Easter Sunday, windows down, rehearsing what I'd say if the conversation about the house turned ugly. I had 3 versions: polite, firm, nuclear. I was hoping for polite. I was ready for firm. Pulling into Birch Lane, I counted the cars in the driveway. Tyler's black BMW, brand new, no idea who paid for it. Lorraine's white SUV. Aunt Ruth's sensible Honda. And Grandma Eleanor's ancient tan sedan, parked crooked because she refuses to let anyone else drive her. There were other cars too, more than usual. A silver pickup I recognized as Uncle Frank's. A red minivan from one of the cousins. 2 or 3 others I didn't know at all. Lorraine had packed the guest list. She wants an audience, I thought. I didn't know yet how right I was. Lorraine met me at the front door with one of her performance hugs, arms wide, voice pitched high enough for the living room to hear. "Andrea, it's been so long since you've visited. We've missed you so much." Tyler was on the couch, phone in hand. He didn't stand up, didn't even look up. I scanned the dining room as I walked through. The long oak table was set for 18. Lorraine's good china. Easter lilies in a glass vase. And next to Lorraine's seat, a manila folder, thick with papers, sitting right beside her water glass. Grandma Eleanor was in the wingback chair by the window, her old brown leather purse resting on her lap. She reached out and caught my hand as I passed. "Sit beside me tonight," she said quietly. Just that. Nothing else. From the kitchen, I heard Lorraine say to Dad, just loud enough to carry, "You remember what you need to say, right?" Dad swallowed. Nodded. The screen door slapped shut behind the last cousin to arrive, and Lorraine called everyone to the table. Lorraine had arranged the seating like a general positions troops. Tyler sat at Dad's right hand, the spot my mother used to occupy. I was at the far end again, between the kitchen doorway and an empty chair no one claimed. Grandma Eleanor had been placed somewhere in the middle, but she picked up her plate and moved it directly across from Dad before Lorraine could object. Aunt Ruth caught my eye from 3 seats down. She gave me a look I recognized, the one she uses in court depositions. "Stay sharp." The food came out: Easter ham, deviled eggs, green bean casserole, rolls from the bakery on Main Street. Lorraine carried the ham platter herself, accepting compliments as she set it down. "I was up at 5 this morning getting everything ready," she said, smiling at Uncle Frank's wife, Helen. "Nobody appreciates how much work goes into this." Nobody mentioned Catherine. Nobody ever does at these dinners. My mother's name hasn't been spoken at this table since roughly 2003. Lorraine steered the small talk the way she steers everything, with a light hand and an iron grip underneath. "Tyler has the most exciting news," she announced, touching his shoulder. "He's been offered a wonderful business opportunity. Tell them, sweetheart." Tyler leaned back, grinning. "Big things coming. Can't say too much yet, but it's going to change everything." I ate my ham in silence. Dad sat at the head of the table and stared at his plate like it owed him money. He hadn't looked at me once since I'd arrived. 20 minutes into the meal, I saw Tyler lean toward Lorraine. His lips moved. I read 2 words. "When?" And then now? Lorraine patted his hand the way you pat someone right before they walk on stage. Then Dad pushed his chair back and stood up. Dad tapped his glass with a butter knife. The conversation stopped like somebody had pulled a plug. "I want to say something important," he began. His voice cracked on the word important, and he cleared his throat. Lorraine opened the manila folder beside her plate and slid a stack of papers toward him. Dad glanced at the top page, then at Lorraine. She gave him the smallest nod. "Lorraine and I have been discussing the future of this house for a while now," he said. "And we've decided, we think the best thing for everyone, is to transfer ownership to Tyler." He said it fast, like ripping off a bandage, and then sat down immediately. The chair scraped against the hardwood. Silence. The kind that fills a room like water. Uncle Frank set down his fork. Cousin Helen pressed her napkin to her lips. Grandma Eleanor's hands, folded on the table, went very still. Tyler leaned forward with a satisfied half-smile. "I'm going to take care of this place," he said. "Keep it in the family." I looked at the stack of papers Lorraine had pushed toward Dad. From where I sat, 18 feet away, at the far end of the table, I couldn't read the fine print, but I could see the letterhead. It wasn't a law firm. It wasn't a family trust document. It was a real estate development company. Crestview Development, LLC. My hands went cold under the table. I pressed my knuckles into my thighs. They weren't keeping the house. They were selling it. The doorframe, the porch, the spot where my mother planted tulips, all of it, bulldozed for condominiums or a strip mall or whatever Crestview Development builds on top of other people's memories. Aunt Ruth set down her knife, quietly, deliberately, like a lawyer who just heard the other side's opening statement fall apart. I kept my voice level. 25 years of practice. That house is where my mother lived and died, I said. I don't agree with this. Tyler tilted his head. He had that look, the one he gets when he's about to say something he's rehearsed in the mirror, something Lorraine polished for him. Oh, come on, Andrea. He spread his hands wide, playing to the room. You were never really part of this family anyway. The air left the table. 18 forks stopped moving. Helen's hand flew to her mouth. Uncle Frank's jaw tightened. Tyler wasn't done. He leaned forward, looked me straight in the eyes, and said, "Ask your mother why." The silence that followed had a physical weight. I could feel it pressing on my chest. My mother, I said, has been dead for 25 years. Exactly. Tyler's smile didn't waver. So you can't ask her, but everyone at this table has heard the rumors. I looked at Dad. Dad had dropped his fork. It hit the edge of the plate with a sharp clink that echoed off the dining room walls. His face was gray. He stared at the tablecloth, and he did not look up. He did not tell Tyler to stop. He did not say a single word. Lorraine sat perfectly still, her expression arranged into something meant to pass for sympathy. But I saw the corner of her mouth, the faintest twitch, like she'd been waiting for this moment the way a director waits for the final curtain. Margaret Holloway, my mother's oldest friend, seated near the end of the table because Grandma Eleanor had insisted she come, turned red from the collar up. Her mouth opened. But before Margaret could speak, a chair scraped the floor at the center of the table. Grandma Eleanor placed both palms flat on the oak, pushed herself up, and stood. I need to pause here for a second, because I know some of you, maybe a lot of you, have sat at a table like that, where someone used your own mother's name as a weapon, and you had to decide right there, in front of everyone, whether to flip the table or let the truth do the work. If that's you, hit subscribe. Not because I'm asking, but because what my grandmother did next is the reason I'm telling you this story at all. Let's keep going. My grandmother is 78 years old. She has arthritis in both knees and a steel rod in her left hip from a fall 6 years ago. Standing up from a chair is not a casual act for her. When Eleanor Wallace stands, she means it. She opened the brown leather purse, the same purse she's carried every day for as long as I've been alive. I'd seen her hold it at Thanksgiving, at Christmas, at my college graduation, where she sat in the back row because Lorraine had filled the family seats with Tyler's friends. That purse went everywhere with her, and sometimes, late at night when we'd sit on her screened porch drinking sweet tea, I'd see her run her thumb along something inside it. A piece of paper, an edge of something she never showed me. Now she pulled it out. A yellowed envelope, soft at the creases from years of handling. She set it on the table between the deviled eggs and the breadbasket. I have waited 25 years to show you this. Her voice was steady. No tremor, no drama, just the plain tone of a woman who has been patient long enough. Lorraine shifted in her chair. Eleanor, this is between Douglas and me. No. Grandma didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. This is between me and the truth. She looked at Tyler, held his gaze until his smirk faded. You just told Andrea she doesn't belong in this family. You told her to ask her mother why. She paused. Let the words settle across all 18 faces at the table. Catherine can't answer, so I will. She unsealed the envelope. The glue gave way like it had been waiting. and drew out a folded sheet of paper. A lab report. Official letterhead. Dated August 14th, 2001. Tyler's smirk was gone. In its place, something that looked a lot like the first flicker of panic. In 2001, Grandma Eleanor said, 1 year after Catherine died, my son started hearing from someone in this house that Andrea might not be his biological daughter. She didn't look at Lorraine when she said it. She didn't need to. Every head at the table turned toward Lorraine on its own. I took Andrea to our family doctor myself. With his guidance, I arranged a paternity test. Andrea was 6 years old. She thought we were getting flu shots. Grandma unfolded the lab report and held it up so the table could see the header. Probability of paternity, 99.998%. She set the paper down flat. Andrea Wallace is the biological daughter of Douglas Wallace. She always has been. Uncle Frank exhaled hard, like he'd been holding his breath. Helen pressed both hands over her mouth. Two of the cousins exchanged a look that said everything. Tyler grabbed the edge of the table. That's from 2001. That's ancient. It doesn't... Aunt Ruth's voice cut through clean and calm. DNA doesn't have an expiration date, Tyler. I looked at my father. Dad's eyes were red. He was staring at the lab report like it was a mirror showing him every wrong turn he'd taken for a quarter century. Dad, my voice came out quieter than I expected. Did you know? Or did you just suspect? He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. I didn't know who to believe. But you chose who to believe, I said. You know that, right? He said nothing. His hands lay flat on the table, palms down, fingers spread, as if the oak was the only thing keeping him from sliding under. From the end of the table, Margaret Holloway stood up. Her voice shook, but her words didn't. Catherine never betrayed Douglas. I was her closest friend for 20 years. Anyone who says otherwise is lying. Grandma Eleanor reached into the envelope again. And that isn't all. The second document was older than the first. Heavier paper, county seal embossed in the corner. Grandma Eleanor laid it beside the DNA report with the care of someone placing flowers on a grave. This is the deed to this house, she said, recorded in 1985. It lists 2 owners, Robert Wallace and Eleanor Wallace, joint tenancy with right of survivorship. She let the legal language hang in the air for a moment. Most of the table didn't know what it meant. Aunt Ruth did. I saw her close her eyes briefly, the way she does when a case turns in her favor. When Robert passed in 2012, Grandma continued, full ownership transferred to me, automatically. I never signed it over to Douglas. I never signed it over to anyone. Lorraine's face went white. Actual white. Not the flushed pink of anger, but the bloodless pale of someone who just heard the floor crack beneath them. That's old paperwork, she stammered. Douglas has lived here for 30 years. Ruth spoke, measured, professional, the same tone she uses in depositions. Living in a house doesn't mean you own it. The deed was never transferred. I pulled the county records myself last month. Eleanor Wallace is the sole legal owner of this property. Tyler's chair scraped backward. You're saying this house isn't Dad's? This house is mine, Grandma Eleanor said. It always has been, and I will decide who stays in it. Lorraine spun toward Dad. Douglas, you're going to let your mother do this? Dad didn't answer. He was still looking at the DNA report, at 25 years of doubt laid out in black ink on a single page. Eleanor turned to me. Her voice softened for the first time all evening. I had planned to leave this house to you in my will, Andrea, but I don't think I should have to die for the right thing to happen. The Easter ham sat untouched in the center of the table. Nobody was eating anymore. Lorraine did what Lorraine always does when the ground shifts beneath her. She cried. She covered her face with both hands, and her shoulders began to shake. The tears came fast and loud, the kind designed to fill a room, to pull focus, to make everyone forget who said what 30 seconds ago. I gave 25 years to this family, she said through her fingers. I cooked, I cleaned, I raised Tyler and Andrea under the same roof. And now you want to throw me out of my own home? A few of the cousins shifted in their seats. Uncle Frank's wife, Helen, bit her lower lip. Lorraine was good at this. She'd had a quarter-century of practice at turning herself into the injured party the moment someone held a mirror up to her. Tyler backed her immediately. Mom sacrificed everything for this family. Everything. Margaret Holloway didn't move. She just said calmly, "Lorraine, I watched you replace every photograph of Catherine in this house. One frame at a time. You call that sacrifice?" Lorraine dropped her hands. Her eyes were dry. I noticed it. Aunt Ruth noticed it. Grandma Eleanor had never stopped noticing. I was building a new home for a new family. A new family, Grandma Eleanor repeated, built on a lie about my dead daughter-in-law. The table went still again. The cousins who'd been wavering, the ones Lorraine's tears almost reached, pulled back. You could see it happen in real time, heads turning, eyes narrowing, postures shifting away from Lorraine like a tide retreating. One of the older cousins spoke up from the far side. "Hold on, what about the developer? What was that folder about?" Lorraine's hand moved instinctively toward the manila folder, but Aunt Ruth was closer, and faster. Ruth opened the folder with the calm efficiency of a woman who reads contracts for a living. She didn't ask permission. She didn't need it. Lorraine had left the papers on a shared dinner table in front of 18 witnesses. Inside, a letter of intent from Crestview Development, LLC. The language was standard boilerplate, but the numbers weren't. An offer to purchase the house and the half-acre lot for $485,000, roughly triple what the property had been worth 5 years ago, before the county approved the rezoning. "Tyler Wallace signed this," Ruth said, turning the page so the table could see the signature line. "As anticipated owner." Uncle Frank leaned forward. "Anticipated owner? He doesn't own anything." "Correct." Ruth set the letter flat on the table. "Tyler signed a letter of intent to sell a property he has no legal claim to. He represented himself to a developer as someone who would hold the title. That's misrepresentation." She looked at Lorraine. "Someone told Crestview that Tyler would be receiving this house. Who was it?" Lorraine said nothing. Her jaw was locked. I stared at the number on the page. $485,000. Split between Lorraine and Tyler, I imagined. Maybe a token amount to Dad, just enough to keep him quiet. That was the price. My mother's tulip beds, the front porch Grandpa Robert painted, the door frame in the kitchen where Catherine measured how tall I was growing, all of it reduced to a line item in a developer's spreadsheet. $485,000, I said out loud. Divided between the two of you. That's the number you put on my mother's memory. Tyler opened his mouth and closed it. For once, he had nothing rehearsed. Lorraine stared straight ahead. Her performance was over, and the audience had stopped clapping. Dad was the last person I expected to speak next. But he did. "I didn't know about the developer," he said. His voice was thin, stripped of everything except the raw sound of a man realizing he's been reading from someone else's script for 25 years. Lorraine turned to him fast. "You knew. I told you. You told me Tyler wanted to keep the house. You said he'd fix the roof. You said it was about family." Dad's hands were trembling against the tablecloth. "You never said anything about selling." Tyler jumped in. "Dad, it's a business opportunity. The rezoning... A business opportunity." Dad repeated the phrase like he was tasting something rotten. He looked at Tyler, really looked at him, maybe for the first time in years. And then he turned to me. I've waited a long time to describe what I saw in his eyes. It wasn't guilt, exactly. It was something worse. It was the face of a man standing at the end of a road, looking back, and seeing every place where he should have turned, but didn't. Every sign he ignored. Every voice he chose not to hear. "Dad," I said, "I'm your daughter. The DNA is right there on the table. I never left. You pushed me out." He dropped his head, both hands covering his face, fingers pressing into his temples. The same gesture I remember from the weeks after Mom died. The same collapse, 25 years later, at the same table. I didn't reach out to comfort him. I'm done pretending everything is fine when it isn't. Grandma Eleanor, still standing, turned to Lorraine. There's one more thing. Do you know why I invited Margaret Holloway tonight? Lorraine's eyes darted to Margaret, then back to Eleanor. Her mask slipped for a half-second, just long enough for me to see real fear underneath. Margaret stood slowly, gripping the back of her chair. She's 62, retired school nurse, still lives 3 houses down from the one where she and my mother became friends the summer they were both pregnant. Margaret with her son, Catherine with me. Lorraine started spreading rumors about Catherine in 2002, Margaret said. The first week she moved into this house. The table held its breath. She told neighbors that Catherine used to disappear in the evenings. She implied Catherine was unfaithful. Margaret's voice shook, but it didn't break. Catherine didn't disappear in the evenings. Catherine had chemotherapy sessions on Tuesday and Thursday nights. She went at night because she wanted to be home with Andrea during the day. Helen gasped softly. One of the cousins pressed a hand to her chest. I know this, Margaret continued, because I drove Catherine to every appointment. I sat in the infusion room beside her, for 8 months, every Tuesday and Thursday. She looked at Lorraine. Catherine didn't betray anyone. The only thing she was guilty of was believing she'd live long enough to protect her daughter. Lorraine shook her head rapidly. Margaret, you're being emotional. I'm being honest. For the first time in 25 years, someone at this table is being honest about Catherine. I sat very still. My hands were shaking under the table, and I pressed them flat against my thighs to stop the trembling. I was not going to cry. Not here. Not in front of Lorraine. But something broke open in my chest. A grief I didn't know I was still carrying. My mother had been dying, and fighting to stay present for me, and someone had used those exact nights, those chemo nights, to build a lie that lasted a quarter century. Mom knew. I'm sure of it now. She knew Lorraine was circling. She just didn't have enough time or enough strength to fight both cancer and a con artist. Lorraine switched tactics the way a cornered animal switches direction. Fast, desperate, and all teeth. Andrea, she stood up. I raised you from the time you were 9 years old. I fed you. I clothed you. I kept a roof over your head. And this is how you repay me? By turning my own family against me? Tyler was right behind her. She's never been grateful. Not once. She moved to Richmond and never looked back. Lorraine turned to the rest of the table, arms spread, palms up, the universal gesture of a martyr on display. You all see this. I give 25 years of my life, and all I get is attacked. A few of the relatives shifted. Lorraine knows how to work a crowd. She's been doing it her entire marriage, positioning herself as the selfless wife, the devoted mother, the woman who held the Wallace family together when nobody else would. But Aunt Ruth leaned forward. Lorraine, Andrea paid her own student loans. She bought her own car. She put herself through college without asking Douglas for a dime. Ruth paused. What exactly is she being ungrateful for? Tyler jumped in. She wants the house. I set my napkin on the table. I don't want the house, Tyler. I want the truth. And the truth is sitting on this table in front of everyone. Lorraine pivoted toward Grandma Eleanor. Her voice dropped an octave. Dangerous now, not wounded. If you own this house, Eleanor, then why did you let us live here for 25 years? What kind of woman holds that over her son's family? It was a decent question. A strategic one. Designed to reframe Eleanor as the villain, the controlling matriarch pulling strings from behind the curtain. Grandma Eleanor looked at Lorraine for a long moment. Then she sat down, smoothed her napkin across her lap, and answered. Real quick, I see some of you already typing in the comments, and I love that. But let me ask you something specific. If you were sitting at that table and someone tried to use your dead mother's name to call you an outsider, what would your grandmother have done? Drop your answer below. Start with, my grandma would have, because some of these responses are going to be incredible. And while you're here, hit that like button. We're getting to the part where Lorraine realizes she built her entire empire on a foundation she never owned. I let you live here, Grandma Eleanor said, because Robert, my husband, loved Douglas. He wanted his son to have a home to raise a family in. That was the agreement, not a deed transfer, a handshake between a father and a son. She folded her hands on the table, steady, measured. I kept quiet for 25 years because I hoped Douglas would see the truth on his own. I hoped he'd look at Andrea and recognize Catherine's eyes. I hoped he'd ask himself why his daughter stopped coming home for holidays, why she never called. She glanced at Dad. He flinched. But Douglas didn't look, because someone kept standing between him and his daughter. She turned back to Lorraine. Every time he might have questioned the rumor, you reinforced it. A comment here, a question there. Don't you think Andrea looks different from you? Wasn't Catherine out late a lot before she got sick? Small things, drip by drip, until my son stopped trusting the one person who never gave him a reason to doubt. Eleanor touched the yellowed envelope. I carried this every day, not as a weapon, as a reminder to myself that Andrea is a Wallace. Every night I opened it, I told myself, one day, she'll need this. I prayed that day would never come. She looked at Lorraine. Today it came. Because you did this in front of me, in front of everyone. If I stay silent tonight, it means I agree, and I will not agree to the erasure of my granddaughter. Nobody spoke. Uncle Frank was gripping the edge of the table. Helen had tears on her cheeks. Even the cousins who barely knew me were staring at Eleanor with something that looked like reverence. I don't control this family, Lorraine, but I will protect Catherine's name in this house, because Catherine can't protect it herself. Tyler kicked his chair backward. It struck the wall behind him, and the crack of wood against plaster silenced whatever murmuring had started among the cousins. This is garbage, he said. His face was flushed, the veins in his neck standing out. The polished performance from earlier was gone, stripped away like a cheap coat of paint. I've been here 25 years. I mowed the lawn. I was here. He jabbed a finger at me, ran off to Richmond the second she could. Aunt Ruth's voice didn't rise a single decibel. Tyler, when was the last time you fixed the roof? What? The roof. You told Lorraine you'd fix it. Douglas hired a contractor last October. I saw the invoice, $2,200. Tyler blinked. I was going to fix it, when the house was mine. And instead you signed a letter selling it to a developer, I said. So, which was it, Tyler? Were you going to take care of the house, or were you going to demolish it? He swung toward Lorraine. Mom, say something. Lorraine sat rigid. She scanned the room, face by face, seat by seat, looking for an ally. She found none. Uncle Frank wouldn't meet her eyes. Helen was shaking her head slowly. The cousins who'd wavered earlier had gone still, arms crossed, mouths shut. Tyler slammed his palm on the table. Fine. If this house belongs to Grandma, then who's she giving it to? Andrea? She doesn't even live in Millfield. Grandma Eleanor didn't flinch at the noise. She looked at Tyler with something close to pity. You're right. Andrea doesn't live here, because no one in this family gave her a reason to stay. Tyler opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He stood there, hands still flat on the table, a man-sized boy who had just discovered the stage lights were off and the audience had left. It started with Uncle Frank. He set his napkin on the table and looked at Lorraine the way you look at someone whose story just stopped adding up. Lorraine, for years, every time I asked about Andrea, you told me she didn't want to come around. You said she had issues with the new family structure. He paused. Were those Andrea's words or yours? Lorraine pressed her lips together. I was trying to give her space. Helen leaned in. You told me she had a difficult personality. Those were your exact words. You know how Andrea is. I repeated that to other people, Lorraine. I repeated it because I trusted you. One of the older cousins, Aunt Patrice, Robert's niece, raised her hand like she was in church. I've been sending Andrea a Christmas gift through Lorraine every year for the past decade. She looked directly at me. Andrea, honey, did you ever get any of them? I shook my head. No, ma'am. I didn't receive anything. The room erupted, not shouting, something worse. The low, ugly sound of people realizing they've been lied to for years. Chairs shifting, sharp intakes of breath, Frank muttering under his breath, Patrice pressing her hand over her heart. That's a misunderstanding, Lorraine said quickly. I must have forgotten. 10 years of forgotten Christmas gifts? Frank said. For a child you claim you raised? I watched it happen. The social scaffolding Lorraine had spent 25 years constructing, collapsing in real time. Every relationship she'd maintained through selective truths and careful omissions was cracking under the weight of one dinner's worth of honesty. She had isolated me from the whole family, not just from Dad, from aunts, uncles, cousins, people who had been asking about me, thinking about me, sending gifts I never knew existed. 25 years. And I thought nobody cared. I needed a moment. While the table buzzed with cross-conversations, Frank pressing Lorraine for answers, Patrice wiping her eyes, Helen comforting one of the younger cousins who looked shell-shocked. I pushed my chair back and walked into the kitchen. The doorframe between the kitchen and the pantry is white-painted pine, scuffed at the base from years of foot traffic. I'd walked past it 1,000 times growing up without thinking about it. I knelt down. It was still there. Faded, but legible. My mother's handwriting in number 2 pencil. Andrea, 3 feet 2 inches, March 1998. And next to the measurement, a tiny 5-pointed star, drawn with the careful hand of a woman who wanted her daughter to know that every inch of growth was something worth celebrating. I touched the pencil lines with my fingertip. The graphite was smooth. 28 years, and the marks held. Footsteps behind me. Slow, careful. The particular rhythm of someone with a steel hip and arthritic knees. Grandma Eleanor rested her hand on my shoulder. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, looking at the same marks I was looking at. I check every time I visit, she said quietly, to make sure they're still there. I understood then. The purse she carried everywhere, the envelope. The visits where she'd drift into the kitchen alone for a minute or two. She'd been standing guard over this doorframe for years, over the DNA results, over the deed, all of it. A quiet, stubborn watch that nobody else knew about. Grandma, I said, I want to keep this house, not for the money, because Mom is still here. She squeezed my shoulder. I know, sweetheart. Then she told me something that cracked me wide open. Catherine said something to me before she passed. She said, Mom, keep the house for my girl. Don't let anyone erase it. She'd called my grandmother Mom, because that's who Eleanor was to her. I walked back into the dining room and stood at the head of the table. Lorraine's end. The spot she'd claimed every holiday for 25 years. The seat closest to the kitchen so she could control the flow of food and conversation and narrative. I didn't sit down. I stood. And for the first time in my life, every person at that table was looking at me. I want to be clear about a few things. My voice was steady. I had not rehearsed this. I didn't need to. First, I am the biological daughter of Douglas Wallace. A DNA test conducted in 2001 confirms it. That document is on this table. I looked at Tyler. He was leaning against the wall near his toppled chair. Second, this house is legally owned by Eleanor Wallace. The deed has never been transferred. That document is also on this table. I looked at Lorraine. Third, Tyler signed a letter of intent to sell this property to a developer for $485,000, representing himself as the anticipated owner. He isn't. That letter is on this table too. Then I took a breath. I didn't come here for revenge. I came because my father invited me. But I'm not going to leave without the truth. And the truth is now in front of all of you. I turned to Dad. I'm not angry at you, Dad. I'm disappointed. But I'm still your daughter. That doesn't change because someone wanted it to. I turned to Lorraine. I won't call you my mother. I never have. But I won't call you my enemy either. I'll just call you the person I once trusted. I turned to Tyler. If you want to sue, sue. But I'd talk to a lawyer first, one who isn't Aunt Ruth. Then I straightened up. Grandma Eleanor and I will discuss the future of this house privately. This dinner is over. I picked up my plate, carried it to the kitchen, and set it in the sink beside the doorframe where my mother's pencil marks still held. The guests filtered out in twos and threes. No one lingered the way people usually do after Easter dinner. No second helpings, no coffee on the porch, no promises to do this again soon. Lorraine stood at the front door accepting stiff goodbyes from people who couldn't look her in the eye. I was putting on my jacket in the hallway when I heard them, Lorraine and Dad, behind the closed door of the study. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was passing through. But the walls in that house are thin, and Lorraine's voice carries when she wants it to. You have to talk to your mother, Douglas. She's old. Someone is influencing her. Andrea is manipulating her to steal the house from us. Andrea didn't manipulate anyone. Dad's voice was different. Harder, like a man testing his own spine for the first time in decades. She didn't even know about the deed until tonight. But you're not going to let your mother throw me out? I'm your wife. 25 years, Douglas. 25 years, Dad repeated, and you told me my daughter wasn't mine. A silence. I never said that. Lorraine's pitch dropped, careful, precise. I just asked questions. You asked questions every single day for 25 years, Lorraine. That's not asking, that's answering. I stepped away from the door. I didn't want to hear the rest. I'd heard enough, more than enough, and the part of me that once needed my father to say the right thing had finally stopped waiting for it. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't matter. Hearing him push back against her, even once, even late, it landed somewhere in my chest. Not forgiveness. Something smaller. A crack where light might eventually get through. I walked out to my car. Grandma Eleanor was already in her sedan, engine idling. She rolled down the window. Tuesday, she said. I'll call Ruth. We'll get the paperwork started. Ruth filed the cease and desist letter to Crestview Development on Wednesday. By Thursday afternoon, the developer's attorney had responded. They were withdrawing the letter of intent entirely. No lawsuit, no negotiation. Tyler Wallace had misrepresented his ownership, and Crestview wanted nothing to do with the liability. Tyler's $485,000 deal evaporated in 48 hours. The following week, Grandma Eleanor signed a quitclaim deed transferring full ownership of the house to me. Ruth handled the paperwork, filed it with the county recorder's office, and called me that evening to confirm. It's done, she said. Your name is on the deed, effective immediately. I sat in my Richmond apartment and stared at the document on my kitchen table. My name, Andrea Wallace, owner of the house at 14 Birch Lane, Millfield, Virginia. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post about it online. I just sat there for a very long time, thinking about a woman who planted tulips and drew stars on door frames and died before she could see what happened to either one. In Millfield, the news traveled the way news travels in small towns, through the post office, the hardware store, the church parking lot after Sunday service. By the following weekend, everyone knew. Lorraine Wallace's 25-year narrative had collapsed, and the wreckage was public. Her friends from the Women's Auxiliary at Grace Lutheran quietly stopped calling. The invitations to book club and the Fall Bazaar Committee dried up. People are generous with second chances in small towns, but deliberate deception, the kind that spans a whole generation, crosses a line that casseroles can't fix. Tyler landed on a developer blacklist. Misrepresentation, even in a non-binding letter, has consequences in a small market. No one in Millfield or the surrounding counties would partner with him. My father called me 4 times that week. I didn't answer. 2 weeks after Easter, I drove to Millfield with a single key on a plain ring. Grandma Eleanor had pressed it into my hand the morning after the deed transfer. "The back door sticks," she'd told me. "Jiggle it left, then push." Lorraine and Tyler had moved out. Eleanor gave them 2 weeks. They took 11 days. Dad was still there, sleeping in the downstairs guest room, keeping to himself. I didn't know what to say to him yet, so I planned my first visit for a Saturday morning when he'd be at the hardware store. The house was quiet when I walked in, the kind of quiet that only happens when someone aggressive has finally left a space, like the air itself unclenched. I went straight to the kitchen, knelt at the doorframe. Andrea, 3 feet 2 inches, March 1998. The star, still there, untouched. Then I checked the coat closet under the stairs, the one Lorraine used for storage. Behind the vacuum and a stack of old tablecloths, I found a cardboard box I'd never seen before. Inside, my parents' wedding photo. Catherine and Douglas on the courthouse steps, her hair pinned with daisies. A baby picture of me, still in the hospital bracelet, and a slim hardcover book, Goodnight Moon, with my mother's handwriting on the inside cover. For Andrea. Read this when the world gets loud. Love, Mom. Lorraine had packed my mother into a box and shoved her under the stairs. For 25 years. I carried the box to the living room, set the wedding photo on the mantel, above the fireplace, where Lorraine's anniversary portrait had hung. Catherine Wallace looked out into the room she'd loved, young and smiling, daisies in her hair. On the kitchen counter I found an envelope. Grandma Eleanor's handwriting. "This house is yours now. Keep the pencil marks, and plant the tulips." A month after Easter, I finally picked up when Dad called. We met at Becker's Diner on Route 11, neutral ground, vinyl booths, coffee that tastes like it's been on the burner since 1987. He was already sitting when I walked in. He looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, like the scaffolding Lorraine had built around him had been removed, and he didn't know how to hold himself up without it. "I'm sorry, Andrea." He said it before I'd even slid into the booth. "I know that's not enough." "It isn't," I said, "but I want to hear you say it anyway." He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. Lorraine started early, right after she moved in. She'd say things, nothing big at first. "Doesn't Andrea look different from you?" "Catherine was always out in the evenings, wasn't she?" I told myself I didn't believe it, but she said it every day. "Every single day, Andrea." And after a while the question stopped sounding like a question. "You could have asked Grandma. You could have run a DNA test yourself." I was afraid of the answer. "You were more afraid of losing Lorraine than losing me." He didn't argue. His fingers tightened around the mug, and he stared into the coffee like the answer might be floating in there somewhere. "I can't undo 25 years, he said. "No, you can't." I set my hands flat on the table. "I don't need your apology to keep going, Dad. I've been going without one for a long time. But if you want to know your daughter, your actual daughter, you start over. From the beginning. You show up when you say you will. You call when you say you'll call. And you never, ever let someone else tell you who I am." He nodded. It was shaky, and it was small. And it was the first honest thing he'd done at a table in a very long time. I heard the rest through Aunt Ruth, who hears everything through county records, church gossip, and the quiet efficiency of a woman who's been practicing law in the same town for 26 years. Lorraine rented a 1-bedroom apartment in Staunton, 30 minutes east. Douglas signed separation papers, not a full divorce, not yet, but a legal line drawn down the middle of a marriage that had been running on fumes and fabrication. She kept calling him. Every few days, a new angle. She was lonely. She was sorry. She needed him. He couldn't survive without her. Douglas stopped picking up. Tyler left Virginia entirely, moved to Columbus, Ohio, took a sales position at a company that manufactures industrial shelving. No BMW anymore. He'd leased it, and the payments had been coming from a joint account Lorraine shared with Dad. That account was frozen the week Ruth filed the separation papers. Lorraine lost her seat on the Grace Lutheran Women's Auxiliary. Nobody asked her to resign. They just stopped adding her name to the email chain. In a small town, that's the equivalent of a public sentencing. I didn't track any of this on purpose. I didn't need Lorraine to suffer to feel whole. Her consequences were hers. The natural result of building a life on a foundation of lies and then losing the deed to the ground beneath it. She sent me one text message 6 weeks after Easter. "You tore this family apart." I read it, deleted it, didn't reply. There was a time when that message would have gutted me, when I would have stared at the screen for hours, wondering if she was right, wondering if keeping the truth quiet would have been the kinder thing. But kindness that requires you to accept your own erasure isn't kindness. It's compliance. I put my phone down and went out to the porch to water the tulip bulbs I'd just planted. I started working on the house in May. Weekends only. I'd drive down from Richmond on Friday evening, work Saturday and Sunday, and head back before dark. The bones were good. Grandpa Robert built things to last, and the structure hadn't changed much in 40 years. What needed fixing was cosmetic, and most of it was reversal, putting back what Lorraine had removed. I painted the porch trim the same blue Grandpa had used. I found the original color on a paint chip tucked inside his workshop journal in the garage. I left the front door as it was, but I painted around the smudge near the bottom, a faded streak of pink from when I was 5 and Mom let me help. That smudge stays. I dug out the white gravel Lorraine had laid over the front flower beds and turned the soil. Planted yellow tulips, the same Dutch variety Mom used to order from a catalog every fall. Margaret Holloway brought over a flat of them from the nursery in Waynesboro. "Catherine's favorites," she said. "Emperor tulips. They come back every year if you leave them alone." I hung photographs. Catherine and Douglas on the courthouse steps. Me as a newborn. A picture Margaret had found in her own closet. My mother holding me on the porch of this house, summer of 1993, sunlight catching the daisies in the window box behind us. I'd never seen that photo before. I framed it and hung it next to the kitchen door frame, where the pencil marks are. One Saturday in late June, Dad showed up with a ladder and a box of shingles. He didn't ask if he was welcome. He just started patching the south-facing section of the roof that had been leaking since winter. I brought him a glass of water. He drank it. We didn't talk much, but he was there. And for now, that counted. In July, I set a table on the front porch. Nothing fancy. A folding table from the garage. A checkered cloth Margaret lent me. Mason jars with lemonade, grilled chicken, a green salad with tomatoes from Eleanor's garden. Grandma Eleanor got the seat at the head. I didn't have to think about it. She earned it a long time ago. Aunt Ruth came. Margaret came. Aunt Patrice drove in from Roanoke with a pecan pie and an apology for 10 years of Christmas gifts that never reached me. Uncle Frank and Helen brought sweet corn from their garden. Nobody mentioned Lorraine. Nobody mentioned Tyler. There was nothing to say about them that the dinner table hadn't already settled. I made sweet potato casserole. Catherine's recipe. Margaret had written it from memory on an index card. The measurements approximate. The oven temperature a guess. She never measured anything exactly, Margaret told me. She cooked by feel. It came out slightly oversweet and a little soft in the middle. Not perfect, but it was hers, and now it was mine, and Eleanor took a second helping without being asked. Dad arrived 20 minutes late. He stood at the porch gate with his hands in his pockets, looking at the table like he wasn't sure which version of the Wallace family this was. I caught his eye, nodded. He came up the steps and sat in the last open chair, the one at the end of the table near the porch railing, the seat I used to sit in at Lorraine's dinners. He didn't complain. He didn't comment. He just sat, and he ate. And when Eleanor told a story about Grandpa Robert burning the Thanksgiving turkey in 1979, he laughed. A real laugh. The first one I'd heard from him in years. I looked around the table. This was my family, not the one I'd been assigned, the one I chose to keep. If you're still listening, and I hope you are, let me tell you something I didn't understand until that summer. I spent 25 years waiting for my father to see me, waiting for him to look past Lorraine, past the whispers, past whatever doubt she dripped into his ear day after day, and recognize his own daughter. I thought if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, never caused trouble, he'd finally turn around and say, "There you are." He never did. And it wasn't because I was invisible. It was because someone kept standing in his line of sight, and he let her. I don't hate Lorraine. I don't hate Tyler. I hate the silence. 25 years of it, from my father and from me. I played my part in it too. I stopped coming home. I stopped calling. I told myself I was protecting my peace, but part of it was fear. Fear that if I pushed too hard, I'd lose the last thread connecting me to this family, to this house, to my mother. You want to know my biggest regret? It isn't the Easter dinner. It isn't being humiliated in front of 18 people. It's this. I never once sat down with my grandmother and asked, what really happened? The truth was always there, in her purse, on the doorframe, in Margaret's memory. I just needed to ask the question sooner. But I also know this. The moment you learn the truth matters less than what you do with it. You can use it as a weapon or a foundation. I chose foundation. I kept the house. I planted the tulips. I hung my mother's pictures. And I stopped waiting for someone else to tell me I belonged. I belong because I say so. The deed is in my name. And the pencil marks on the doorframe are in my mother's handwriting. That's enough proof for anyone. Since that Easter, I've been living by a few new rules. Nothing dramatic, just lines I drew for myself that help me sleep at night. 1. I don't explain where I belong anymore. The DNA said it. The deed said it. The doorframe said it. If someone still has questions after all of that, the problem isn't my evidence. It's their willingness to look at it. 2. I welcome my father when he shows up. But I don't go searching for him. For 25 years, I knocked on a door that kept closing. The door to my house is open now, wide open. But he has to walk through it himself. No shortcuts, no one else carrying him. 3. I plant tulips every spring. Yellow emperor tulips, the same ones my mother ordered from the catalog. They go in the front beds along the walk, where Lorraine's white gravel used to be. Every March, they push through the cold soil. And every March, I stand on the porch and watch them open. They come back because that's what tulips do. They survive the frost and they bloom anyway. My mother would have liked that metaphor. She probably would have said I was being dramatic. And 4, I make sweet potato casserole for every holiday. Catherine's recipe. Margaret's handwriting on an index card. The measurements are approximate. The oven temperature is a guess. It's never quite right, and that's exactly the point. My mother didn't leave me this recipe in a will. She left it in the memory of her best friend. And that's the kind of inheritance Lorraine could never have sold to a developer. Boundaries aren't walls. They're door frames. You can still see through them. You just get to decide who walks in. And if someone walks in and makes you feel like a stranger in your own home, you check the deed. Make sure your name is on it. Then ask them to leave. It's March again. Almost Easter. The tulips along the front walk are just starting to push through. Small green spears testing the air, deciding if it's safe to open. I'm hosting this year. The table is set for 8. Grandma Eleanor, Aunt Ruth, Margaret, Patrice, Frank and Helen, and Dad, if he comes. I sent him an invitation. A real one, handwritten, mailed to the guest room he's still renting on the other side of town. He hasn't replied yet, but the chair is there, at the end of the table, waiting. Lorraine sent me a message last week. I hope you're satisfied. I read it the same way I read the last one. Then I deleted it. I don't owe her a response. I don't owe her my anger. I don't owe her anything at all. Tyler is somewhere in Columbus, selling industrial shelving. I hear he's doing fine, in the way that people say fine when they mean quiet. I don't keep track. That chapter closed when the cease and desist was filed, and I don't reread closed chapters. Last night, I walked through the kitchen on my way to bed. I stopped at the doorframe, the way I always do. The pencil marks were there. Andrea, 3 feet 2 inches, March 1998. The star my mother drew beside it. I picked up a pencil from the counter, reached up and drew a second star, right next to hers, small and careful, the way she taught me. She measured how tall I was. I'm measuring how far I've come. My name is Andrea Wallace. I'm 32 years old. This is my house. And the woman who built the lies is gone. But the woman who drew the stars, she's still right here, in every mark on this doorframe, in every tulip pushing through the soil, in every plate of sweet potato casserole that doesn't come out quite right. She's here. And so am I. That's my story. And if it hit close to home, if you've ever sat at a table where your own family made you feel like a guest in your own life, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment below. My boundary moment was, because I believe every woman who draws a line gives permission to the next one. If you want more stories like this, check the description. I've linked a few that'll keep you up past your bedtime. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And remember, you don't need anyone's permission to belong in your own life. See you in the next one.